Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back with another episode of our top 100 movies, and we are on episode number 25. And I butchered the intro. We're on episode number 25. I like how John nodded to me butchering the intro. Thanks, man. We're on episode number 25, and a quarter of the way through our top 100. We're getting there. We are moving right along, and tonight is the first episode, one of two, where we actually are not talking about either one of our top 100s. You can see it at the bottom of the screen here. My number 76 was Children of Men. John's number 76 was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. John, of the Spotless Mind.
I know. I know. I tried, but StreamYard said I had to limit it to 50 characters.
Don't you love when that happens? Yeah, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is not going to fit whenever we do it. That happened earlier. I forget which movie it was, but I had to cut the title down, and I think with 3 colors red, I had to just call it Red or something too. So it happens. But we would have been talking about Children of Men and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 2 of the best genre movies ever made. One for sci-fi, one for rom-coms. But we're gonna be talking about those later because I have one at like number 5, and I think John has one at like around there, so much higher. Instead, we're talking about District 9 and Columbus. And I will preface with this. This is the worst week by far for the two of us. I really believe that. John, not a huge fan of District 9. I did not like Columbus, and I can't wait to discuss this. And on top of that, District 9 got a half-star bump just because it holds a special place in my heart because of when I saw it and what it did. It is not as good as I remember, and I will say that now.
It was not.
No, it was not. But I think it is interesting to talk about that now that we're 12 years removed from that movie coming out, and kind of see how your perspective changes because, John, I think that's been happening a lot. Not necessarily that you're like, oh, I don't like this movie as much, but as we go through your top 100 and we talk about some of these movies that like do have more of like a childhood recollection or like A Knight's Tale or something like that. And the same thing for me, some of these movies, all of a sudden you watch them at a different time in your life and you're like, that's the same movie I watched when I was younger, but it's not the same movie anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely been readjusting my top 100 as we go through to just kind of like see where these things are. And it's really interesting looking at it and seeing which ones kind of have recency bias played into their placement. And like, we are going to talk about some of those further up. One Phil keeps trashing on me for, so it's okay. We will eventually get there. But yeah,
every podcast I can.
It's really interesting in looking in retrospect to how these things played out. And District 9, rewatching it this week, it's amazing how much attention that film got when it came out.
Well, and that's the thing. So I don't know how we should approach this week. I don't know if we should just talk about them over the top of each other. I don't really know what we should do here because I don't feel like it's a bad idea since neither one is actually in our top 100 to kind of like do a half hour and then maybe bounce over to what was the best thing we watched this week and then do another half hour because I don't necessarily think we need to focus on either of these since it is a different thing. But with District 9, which is the more popular of these two for sure, I think it was unbelievably unique when it came out. And I think the problem is now we've seen it done better, but this was nominated for Best Picture in arguably the worst year for Best Picture nominees of all time. It's awful, other than maybe 85 or something. It's awful. Yeah. And The Hurt Locker winning, I don't really like The Hurt Locker. And it was like, is that or Avatar? What's it going to be? And, the drama of Will and Education get in there. And these are like good movies, but come on. But when I look at this, I'm like, I think it was just so unique. And while Avatar was getting so much attention that year, it was just like Avatar. Here was this like movie that people who didn't think Avatar was that cool could be like, no, this is the better sci-fi movie of this year. And I'm smart for liking this. And the funny part is I think there's a really good message. I think the style starts off amazing, but I think it starts to lose itself. But it's still way smarter than Avatar is. I have no problem saying that.
Absolutely. And I mean, Avatar was huge when it came out, and mostly because of the visual effects and the time put into that movie. And when you boiled down the plot of Avatar, it was a plot we had seen many times before. And District 9 came out at a time where people were really starting to reflect on apartheid again. I mean, even if we look at other films that were coming out around the same time, Invictus came out around this time as well. So we're kind of looking at apartheid from a different lens. We were 18 years removed from the end of apartheid at that point. And it was kind of, it's that 20-year threshold with like these type of events, right? We look at it with like MASH and looking at the Korean War, right? 20 years after something happens, that's when you kind of get to the point where it's okay to talk about that thing in a critical lens and everything like that. And that was the point when we started looking at apartheid more. And District 9 was an interesting way to demonstrate what apartheid was, quite frankly, for a lot of people who weren't alive when apartheid took place.
And that's what I think was interesting about this movie is, so Neil Blomkamp is from South Africa, right? If I'm not mistaken, he is from South Africa. I'm going to look this up to make sure I'm not, because I feel like I've given so much wrong information on this podcast, But so yeah, he's a South African Canadian. Hello, John, give him an extra half star. He's Canadian.
Oh, my bad.
But being that he's South African, like this is something that even if he was young during it or anything like that, he grew up with. But I think what's interesting about what he was able to do with District 9 is he did make it feel like something that he turned it into a movie that was accessible for everybody. And like most Americans have not been to South Africa. Most haven't been to Africa, let alone a specific spot like South Africa. And South Africa is like a ridiculously far flight for anywhere in America. It's a totally different time zone. It's a different hemisphere. It's a lot. And so a lot of people have not just been to South Africa. And I think to still make it relatable. And what I respect about this movie is I feel like you can see where the production interference, where the studio interference starts to come in, because how this movie begins is so strong. And then you find out, hey, something bad is going to happen to Vicus. Like, what's going to happen? We're not going to tell you, but something bad is going to happen to Vicus. And it pulls you right in. It pulls you right in, and you're like, okay, let's go. And then halfway through, you're like, wasn't this a documentary? Like, wasn't this being edited like a documentary? Like, how does Christopher Johnson and his son have like 3 scenes in this movie? Who was filming those? Like, but I still think it does a really good job of keeping it interesting and keeping it compelling for anybody who's going to sit down and watch it. So I give it a lot of respect in that aspect. But I do think that the best sci-fi is sci-fi where you can just, it's relatable and whatever. I think the thing with this movie is it's one of the best sci-fi movies to come out in the last 20 years, but it was going for something higher than what it actually achieved. And I think if this movie had set out, and I think that's why I got such a claim at the time, and why I mean, I still love this movie. This movie's unbelievably entertaining, but I think that it's one of those movies that had it set out to be like, I watched Sahara this week. Sahara sets out to be a dumb action movie. And then you're like, this is an entertaining movie. Yay. This movie set out to be like Tarkovsky level. This set out to be like a Charlie Kaufman kind of sci-fi, like think about this. This set out to be one of those like real Terminator. We want you to think on a different level about humanity and all that. And that's actually what knocks it down, because when it starts to lose itself, it starts to feel like, oh, well, screw them. And it doesn't get the benefit of the doubt that a lot of other movies in this genre would get for making something as entertaining and action-packed and with a message the way this movie does.
Yeah, and it's really interesting looking at this movie through the lens of 12 years later now, when we have had such this focus on a very different type of sci-fi movie lately. I mean, we're talking about Ex Machina in a couple of weeks. And that's a very different, more serious take on sci-fi. But really, the movie that came out that I think really surpasses what District 9 is trying to do is Arrival, which we'll be talking about a long, long time from now. But looking at District 9 after seeing Arrival and seeing like this kind of like approach to first contact that is demonstrated in District 9, it's so intrusive and invasive and a very military-esque first contact in this movie. And then they get in there and they kind of like see that these people are all suffering, and then they just condemn them. And it is really a reflection on not just apartheid, but society in general. But it's just so weird to see like those drastically different approaches, because we have seen different approaches to first contact in the last decade.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that like this went with the very like in your face. This is very much about like racism, and it's very much about what like Contact doesn't do that. Contact still goes with kind of the Close Encounters of the Third kind of approach. But it kind of it goes that route of taking it a little bit more seriously, a little bit less like dramatic. This at the end of the day is a war movie. This is a dramatic war movie. This is an action movie. That's what this is supposed to be. And again, like, it doesn't have, like, I personally believe the visuals in this movie are better than Avatar. I don't care what anybody says, because Avatar on a small screen looks like shit. You could watch District 9 on anything, and it's got that kind of guerrilla warfare type making that really works. But again, like, I like the way it approaches this of like, we're going to go in, we're going to kick them out, we're going to put them in containment camps. Great. Got it. Know what this movie's about. Don't really need to think much deeper about it. It's when it starts like halfway through, I'm like, that's not possible. That's not possible. And I think the problem is we've seen so many movies now that go with this documentary, mockumentary, found footage type approach. And we've seen them do it almost flawlessly, that this feels like it loses that too much. And I almost think this movie would have played better if they like spoofed like History Channel type movies or History type like mockumentaries where they'll show the footage and then they'll do like reenactment. And it's like, no. And like if they did like a reenactment of the aliens talking to each other and it was like kind of like overblown racist, I think that actually would have looked better. The CGI in this movie is phenomenal. All of that stuff really, really works. But I do think that just losing the style hurts. And you know, for as much as I didn't like Columbus, that's a movie that once it stuck with its style, that was its style literally the entire movie. Two totally different movies, but that was its style the whole movie. And that was kind of where I was like, ooh, it didn't catch me right at the beginning, so now I'm screwed. Whereas District 9, it catches me at the beginning, and I love it. But then as it starts going on, I'm like, where's it going? Where's it going? What's happening? Why are you falling apart? Stop falling apart. Come on, come back together. And it kind of does at the end. I mean, like I said, 3.5 stars. I gave it a 0.5-star bump because of the nostalgia. This is like a 3-star movie.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I put in my review on Letterboxd too. Is like, this is just two very different movies. You start off with this very interesting look at, again, like that first contact and political response to it. If you line up the timing, they're literally saying that this alien ship arriving over Johannesburg is why apartheid stopped. Like there's a reason they chose exactly 20 years when this is going on. And it's really interesting seeing like the Black people in South Africa commenting on this after just going through this exact same type of segregation. And like that part's not lost on me. That part's really interesting. The interesting, like Vikas is an incredibly interesting character where you realize that there's like some nepotism that's put him in charge of this project. But at the same time, it's his father-in-law setting him up for failure, essentially. And like, that part's so compelling. And then it goes into this whole, like, you know, he starts changing and he gets taken to this lab that somehow they're trying to pay off that there are, like, documentary cameras down there for all of that. And we all know that wouldn't happen. And it's fine because it kind of seems like they've dropped that aspect of it, except there are points where they like give you the subtitle of X hours after exposure. And it's like, oh, so this is the documentary still?
Yeah, and you got to think, a year before this, Cloverfield came out and nailed this. Nailed it. Like Cloverfield, as you know, that movie kind of, you know, it's hit or miss because people just either like that style or they don't. But Cloverfield nailed it. It never breaks that found footage sci-fi thing. And another thing that I'm left wondering is this movie, obviously, it was pretty groundbreaking. It felt groundbreaking when it came out. It felt like Cloverfield's not trying to deal with like a bigger message or a bigger mindset, but this was. But something else that I wonder, and it didn't really play into my watching of the film, but I don't know if necessarily maybe it's why we don't hear about District 9 as much anymore, is Neil Blomkamp has just not made a good movie since. He did Elysium and he did Choppy. And like, maybe you like those, maybe you don't, but neither one of them was very well received. They were both just kind of like meh. And they're both like very on the nose with what they're trying to do. And in District 9, it feels like it works, but like you were saying, you are being hit over the head with it very hard in this movie about what they're trying to state.
Yeah, and that was actually something I was thinking about. I remember seeing Elysium when it came out and being disappointed. It was like, oh, that wasn't as good as District 9. But after rewatching District 9 now, it's like, kind of makes sense why Elysium wasn't that good, because neither's District 9.
Yeah, like it's not subtle. And what's funny is like the movie I'm replacing it with, Children of Men, is not subtle either, but it's also like that's a movie that it does like it's filmed very similarly to District 9, but doesn't do the gimmick of documentary or found footage. But it still feels very much like you're always with them. You feel like the ghost in the car with them. Everything is very like rugged, guerrilla. It's all like that. And so I feel like Children of Men nails that. And Children of Men, another movie, came out 3 years before District 9. District 9, I feel like what the problem was is he tries to take on too much at one time. And I do think that being that it was his first movie and all that, a lot of director interference. And then still, like, the success of this movie is not to go understated. It made a boatload of money. It got nominated for Best Picture. Like, it was a popular movie at the time. And it's just interesting that, like, I feel like this movie gets worse on rewatch. It's always going to get worse on rewatch, no matter how entertaining it is. And I almost think that it could almost it falls under its own expectations, even if people have already seen it, because you remember when it came out being like, oh my God, District 9. And now you watching on District 9. Like, it has that feeling of like a late 80s comedy where you're like, yeah, that was so funny. And then you watch it again and you're like, yeah, it was so okay. Like, it just doesn't land anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it. And again, I think a lot of the hype did come from the fact that, like, when it came out, 2009 was not a great year for films. And like it was coming off 2008, which was also just like mediocre for films, especially coming off of 2007, which was incredible for films.
Yeah.
So District 9 did kind of seem like this shining gem amongst everything else that was coming out. And because it was topical and it did have that deeper meaning, it was kind of pounding down those points that I keep making about sci-fi, that it has to be rooted in something. It has to be talking about the human condition. And it does that. And it does it fairly well. But it just kind of abandons what it's standing for towards the end to seemingly set up a sequel.
Yeah, that was kind of weird too. It does have that feel of like, okay, what's going to happen? I mean, it's kind of haunting that like Vicus's transformation in this movie is incredible. I love that. That's straight out of The Fly, the Cronenberg version, not the OG version, but the Cronenberg. Like, that is straight out of that. Like, his transformation is amazing. The fingernails falling off, the eye, all that stuff. Like, that stuff is so friggin' good. And by the end, you do feel like sick to your stomach because it's essentially like he's now terminal and he's dying. It's like being thrown into a leper colony here. But yeah, like that actually elevates this movie a lot for me. So that is not to go missed at all. But I do agree that it's almost like setting you up to be like, hey, like now we're going to finish the story of Vicus. And not for nothing, Neil Blomkamp probably should do that at this point because he hasn't had a hit in a long time. And it might not be the worst thing for him to bring back District 9 so that it gets back into people's psyche and into their minds.
I mean, there are a lot of implications that this movie sets up with this idea of like a sequel and stuff, right? Like the fact that Vicus transforms into a prawn, which unfortunately we only have this derogatory term for them because we're never told what their official term is or how they're officially classified. We're only told people use the derogatory term prawn, and that's it. But Vicus is turned into a prawn, where we're led to believe Vicus is turned into a prawn at the end of the film. Is that then an implication that the people on this ship were not necessarily prawns to start with?
Yeah, and that's interesting because even Christopher Johnson says at one point, like, I know what did that. There's only one thing that could have done that, something along those lines. And it's like, if that is the case, what is it that did that? What was it? Because what does he have and how is that what powers it, but also what makes them what they are? And I agree, like, there's something there where it's almost like it causes, and like he can turn them back. How come he knows how to turn them back, but have they gone on so long with like evolution or something that they can no longer be turned back? I don't know.
It's really weird. And then there's just, it's just one of those weird questions. And like, it's good when movies leave you wondering about things, but it's not good when there's like this pivotal plot point that's hanging over things that's not answered.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And I mean, that doesn't bother me though in this. I do agree with you that is something that like should be addressed in other movies. Like you can't be just kind of left with that. I'm okay with the ending of this because I'm like, I don't really overthink like, oh, is he going to turn like what is it? Were they always prawns? Whatever. But I think at the end of the day, I think like what this is more trying to say is like we're all the same thing at the end of the day. Like we can all be like yeah, you started on the top. And I think we're seeing that, like I think that's something that like people fear in the world today is like, why are people so fearful of government half the time? It's because like they're scared that it's going to be turned against them the way that it was turned against other people in the past. And I think that when you look at this movie, it's essentially saying like, yeah, you're on top now, but the second that you're no longer useful, you're now just one of us. And it's a very interesting look. I think it's just about, I think what the message is trying to be is it's always kind of like, that whole thing of like, I did not speak up because I was not Jewish and I did not speak up because I was not whatever. I think that's kind of what this movie is trying to say is like, at the end of the day, your time's coming. And once you're in that position, then how are you going to react to it? And we very much see like now Vicus is screwed. He's got nothing. He's got no hope. What's he going to do? And will he ever go back to what he was? I mean, that leaves you with that sick feeling in your stomach. That's the type of sci-fi it's supposed to leave you with. I just think like probably there's like a 30-minute stretch in this movie where I'm like, I really don't know where you went wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that action. It's that the part where it starts getting the action sequence. As soon as they start invading with MNU headquarters and stuff to try to find the fuel, that's where it goes wrong. And there are redeeming qualities to this film for sure. Vicus's character arc in the film is very good. Like he starts off very selfish and stays selfish for a long time, longer than you would think a character would stay selfish in this scenario. And then by the end, he does come around and knows that healing himself isn't as important as helping the prawns escape this persecution that they're under.
Yeah, and so he does like do the good thing, and I think that's what's kind of cool about this movie is like there is still this hero's journey of some hero who fails ultimately. A lot of times they would try to, a lot of sci-fi when it's going for the more action style sci-fi, it always tries to have the happy ending. You think about Star Wars, it's got them all like, we got our medals, we're excited. Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, all of a sudden, now we're going a little bit darker. Now we don't care as much because like now we can get into a darker ending because we're not going for an action movie here. We're actually going for like a thoughtful movie here. And so like, that's why people like Blade Runner, even though I personally think Blade Runner is a steaming pile of crap and I will defend that till the day I die. But like, I hate that movie. But I think people kind of like that because it's supposed to make you think about like the human condition and all of that. And, like, what are you going to be? Children of Men does that unbelievably well. Eternal Sunshine is a sci-fi movie at the end of the day. It does that incredibly well. District 9, I think it does it. Vicus's character is done incredibly well. I think the other characters around it are like cartoony. And maybe that's because it's focusing so much on Vicus and it's going with this documentary style. I don't know, but like it is a little over the top with all of that.
Yeah, it is. And like the presentation of these characters don't make sense either. There are nice hints and setups done throughout the film, and like there's the line that Tanya says they took all the stuff away for the investigation, and at that point is the point where you realize something's going to happen to Vegas. And then there's the person he appointed to succeed him. You see him in like the prison jumper and everything, and like you see these things setting up, and then they have these professionals commenting on things, but they know too much about what's happening in the story for it to make sense.
Yeah, it's almost like you needed wrong information. Like you needed, if this was going to go that route, like I always think about like if you watch some like a historical documentary, you watch something on the History Channel, right?
Yeah.
Or not on the History Channel. Let's say you watch one of these things that like CNN will put out or that Fox News will put out, like an actual like they make it a show. It's not their news cycle, but it's something else. And they put those out. You always have to remember that like this is coming from somewhere. And so it's coming from an angle. And like those are the two best examples. I don't know if it's in the world, but certainly in America. Those are the two best examples because they are so on opposite ends. And so it's coming from somewhere. So when they make that and they say something as if it's fact, that doesn't necessarily mean it's fact. And I think like this movie relies heavily on what they're saying being fact. It is relying heavily on like what these scientists, what these people are saying being like 100% true. And like they were there and they know it. And I think it would almost be better if you did have some of the government people being like, Vickers didn't do anything. Who the hell is Vickers? Like Vickers was a pedophile, or Vickers was sleeping with the aliens. Like give us a little bit of that, and then abandon the mockumentary thing because it wasn't necessary. I do think that's a little, that's kind of where it hurts. And again, I keep saying I gave this 3.5 stars. This is probably a 3-star movie, but it gets that half star just for nostalgia. It's so entertaining. And it's better than a lot of movies that I would give 3 stars because my expectations weren't there. But with this one, when the expectations are there and you overthink every little detail, it does become more difficult to just be like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. It's really hard to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the things that I thought about while watching this movie. It was just like, how likely am I to watch this movie anytime in the next decade? Right. And it's just like, now, I haven't watched this movie since it came out in theaters. And so we're 12 years removed from that. And it still just kind of now felt like the right amount of time before rewatching this movie.
I hadn't seen it in a very long time. The one thing I will say about this movie, this is a perfect movie to watch if you're watching it with film fans. I'm using air quotes here, but like movie people who don't want to watch, like who want to watch something that like makes them feel good. And I know this sounds so pretentious and so scummy, but I'm also about to talk about Columbus for 30 minutes. So, but I know that this sounds so pretentious, but it's just one of those things where I feel like, there's like certain movies. Like I remember when I was in college freshman year, people were like, we want to watch a comedy. I'm like, great, let's watch Adaptation. Put on Adaptation. The first 5 seconds, everybody's like, fuck this. Like, there's no way. We ended up watching Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Great. Forgetting Sarah Marshall is a phenomenal movie. That is a great comedy. But it's also one of those movies where like Adaptation to me is a much better movie. And I think like most people would agree it's a much better movie. But if you're looking for that type of situation, I think District 9 is perfect for that type of situation. District 9 is that type of movie where it's like, we want to watch something that maybe we haven't seen before. We don't want to watch a superhero movie. We don't want to watch something like that. And like, you're not going to be mad being like a massive film person sitting down and watching District 9. Like, you're not going to be like, oh God, but it's so stupid. And you're not going to sit there and want to nitpick it. In your mind, you're gonna be like, yeah, that's dumb. But then you're also going to be like, oh, we're watching this in a fun setting. This is good. Like, it serves that purpose unbelievably well. It serves it unbelievably well. And I would say you'd be hard pressed if you had like, obviously we sit here and watch like Tarkovsky and I have the Ingrid Bergman thing here and all that. But like if somebody's not on that level and they're just like, they watch the Best Picture nominees or they'll watch a few of them or whatever, they're very rarely not going to like District 9. Like District 9 is going to grab their attention. They're going to like it and it's going to get them through. And that's good. Like, I think this movie is like the perfect movie of like, let's sit down and watch this with like someone's dad or watch this with your friend, or like, we're going to go out tonight and it's on HBO and I'm just going to keep it on because it's a fun watch while we're pre-gaming to go to a bar. Like it serves that purpose so unbelievably well. Where it loses it is this was nominated for Best Picture. And this received that type of acclaim of like, this is epic. And like, if I'm going to hold like Marvel movies to this standard of like, yo, it's the same shit all the time, as John learned this week. It's the same stuff all the time. You kind of got to say the same thing about a movie like District 9, where it's like, yeah, you got to point out its flaws. But at the end of the day, I would sit down and I would watch this movie. Like, I put this kind of in like a category with, it's a better version of Armageddon. And I will watch Armageddon every single friggin' time Armageddon is on, because Armageddon is so good at what it's doing. It is nonsense. It's in your face. And that is a masterpiece of being garbage. Like, it is a masterpiece of garbage. And District 9 is a much better, more highbrow, more thoughtful movie than that. But it's also got that same level of like, if it's on, you better believe I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch that movie.
Yeah. And I think that's again, the nice thing about film being subjective. And like, you can find films that kind of appeal to the masses. I can sit down and watch District 9 with my roommate and he'll enjoy it. I sit down and watch Mulholland Drive with my roommate. He hates it. Despite the fact that Mulholland Drive is a significantly better movie than District 9. But yeah, it definitely does have that appeal where you can just kind of slap it on, have fun. You can poke fun at the movie while watching it, as long as you don't get into the too cerebral things. To me, like, the biggest downside about this movie is just like, it just doesn't choose the identity it truly wants to go with.
Yeah.
And if it had, this could have been an incredibly, even more well-received movie than it was, and probably does beat out the Hurt Locker for Best Picture.
Yeah, and I know we said we were going to bounce back and forth, and we didn't, so we're almost at the half hour, so I'll kind of cut it here. But I do think that District 9 as well is a movie that will spark conversation. And I
Mhm.
think that's always a good thing with a movie. Like, this movie will spark some sort of conversation. It will get people talking when it's over about, like, that was cool. I love that. I love this. Blah, 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 blah. There's so many good elements. It really comes down to that stylistic thing. If they didn't go with that style, this might be a 4-star movie, because you just ignore the fact of it doesn't matter that, like, that we don't really know if they were all prawns all the time, or if they were human. Like, we don't know. That doesn't, like, you stop asking those questions, because now it's just shot like a regular movie. Yeah. If they would have done that, I actually think that would have worked better for the movie. And I think that's the biggest thing holding it back in the long run, is that it just doesn't choose what it wants to be. And when it does both of these things, it does both of them very well. But you can't do both and tell me you're making one cohesive story, because you're not.
Yeah. And that's just what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Is sometimes, I mean, in this case, you can tell it was studio interference that probably led to the latter. And I get that. And, like, it is to appeal to the masses. Because in the end, yes, cinema is art, and it is a way the artist projects. But people like making money too. And unfortunately, that does mean that sometimes art gets a little degraded because of it.
Maybe we sing the cabaret song. This is where we put it on.
Yeah.
Money makes the world go round the world. Yeah, that.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it. That's all it is. That's all. And you know what? District 9 was a hell of a box office hit. It was a box office hit in a year with the biggest box office hit of all time up until that point. That's not easy to do. That's not easy to do. And it was. And good for it. It deserved it. I just wish Neil Blomkamp would have grown.
It also came out at the worst time of the year for movies, too, because this came out in, like, September of 2009. Like, that's not a time where you usually get this type of movie.
No, this is a summer blockbuster normally.
Yeah.
But they knew they had something, and that's why they went with it. All right, so overall, District 9, disappointing compared to what I remembered it as a younger person. Same for you. That's fine. I still like it a lot. Like, it's so entertaining.
It's still enjoyable. Just because I give a movie a 2.5-star rating doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the movie. Yeah,
it's one of those things where if your expectations weren't as high, next time you watch it, you might give it 3, because you're like, that was better than I remember it being.
Exactly.
You know, it's just one of those things. It's a tricky beast. But all right, what was the best movie you watched this past week?
North by Northwest.
Have you that first time?
First time. Finally got around to it. It is
good.
Phenomenal movie. Not really what I was expecting, but just like to have this, like, accidental spy thriller. So good. So good. And Cary Grant's amazing in it. Yeah.
Cary Grant, I really think, is, like, he might be my favorite actor of all time. He is so funny. He is so charismatic. He just has it, man. It didn't matter how old that guy got. He just always had it. So entertaining. He had, like, a 40-year career. Like, he was around forever. He was so good. I love North by Northwest. That is such a fun movie. And that I've been watching a lot of older Hitchcock movies, because, like, I have like a 15 Hitchcock films thing. Some of them are really bad, but you can see that once he's able to start to get, like, the mojo, you watch, like, The Lady Vanishes, Sabotage, The 39 Steps, you start getting into those, you start seeing him grow. It's pretty crazy to think that he was already about, like, 13 years into his career before he actually came to America, and all the movies we really remember him for, pretty much in the back half of his career.
Yeah.
North by Northwest, Rear Window, Psycho. Those are all late movies in his career.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, I just had this urge to watch an older movie. So I just, like, looked at my list of movies, like, which movies are pre-60, and threw one on. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a good choice.
Yeah. It's like a pre-James Bond, James Bond.
Yeah. And how about you, Phil? What was the best movie you watched this week?
I will go with They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, which is the Sidney Pollack movie about the Depression-era dance marathon. There's no hope in that movie. There is zero hope in that movie. And it does something very similar that District 9 does, which is funny, where, like, you're watching the movie and then it'll show, like, a flash forward, but very quickly. And you're like, what's that? What's going on here? So you know something's off the whole time. Movie is brutal. Movie is devastating. Gig Young totally deserved the Oscar that he ended up winning for supporting actor that year. Acting across the board is great. Troy Long says Jane Fonda GOAT. She was great in it. Bruce Dern is great in it. I forget the lead actor's name. I don't remember who it is, but he's so good. It's just so good right across the board. So devastating. The desperation of
Yep.
people. And at one point, Gig Young's like, it's all for the show. Like, we need the show. And it's like, you just realize everything that's happening is just for the show. That's all it is. It is masterpiece.
1930s dance marathons are a fascinating part of history. And if you have not explored them, definitely do, because they are some very interesting things.
Oh yeah, those are real, baby. And that's what makes They Shoot Horses, Don't They even more devastating, is you're like, this was something people actually did.
Yeah.
And it was for pure entertainment, and it was for $1,500. That's the most devastating part. Even in 1969, when the movie came out, $1,500 wasn't very much. Now you watch it and you're like, I gotta go find $1,500 somewhere. Like, get out of here. Like that, they were doing like this crazy dance. It's brutal, devastating movie, absolutely devastating, but masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. All right, John, explain to me. Explain it. I want to hear it. I'm not going to rip you. I want to hear it. I want your defense. Convince me.
Okay. So, Kaganda's Columbus came out in 2017. Didn't have a lot of hype around it. Not many people know about this movie. You mention this movie, most people will be like, I have no idea what that is. You mention Columbus, Indiana to people, most of them won't know that it's the modernist architecture mecca of America. But this movie, it's one that I watched after I made my top 100 list for the first time at the behest of a friend of mine who loves this movie. And it's one of his favorite movies of all time. And I finally got around to it. And it blew me away. Yes, it's one of the most beautiful films ever shot, in my opinion. Kaganda perfectly captures the idea of modernist architecture in Columbus. It's so beautifully shot, and every scene is just so meticulous, but at the same time, it just feels so empty and so hollow, because in the end, this movie is just so much about being lost and not knowing exactly what to do with yourself. And I'm just in a stage of my life where that really echoes within me. And I get it, and I just connect so much on an emotional level with this film.
And film is subjective, and that's why it's interesting, though, because I can't sit here and say, John, you're wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if in 12 years maybe you watch it again and you have a District 9 type feeling. It's possible, but I hear what you're saying, and I think that's one of the things. For me, I've always said this. Give me, I agree with you, beautifully shot. That is where my compliment kind of ends. I love Haley Lou Richardson, and I do love John Cho, though. So I will say that. Searching, John Cho, great movie. Haley Lou Richardson, she is great in whatever she's in. Edge of 17, phenomenal. But I think what my biggest problem with new school indie movies, because that's ultimately what this is, a new school indie movie. I am so into 90s era indie movies, the Noah Baumbachs, I made you watch Whit Stillman. I love make it look like shit and have funny dialogue. Give me that. Give me Kicking and Screaming. Give me Barcelona. Give me Metropolitan. Give me I can't even think of the other Noah Baumbach movies, but give me those movies. Give me the low budget. Give me Chasing Amy. Like that's what I'm into. I don't really like You Were Never Really Here. I don't like this. I don't like those movies that are like, I'm going to give you very little. It's going to be a very small, not much going on here. And then that's it. That's all I'm giving you. And it's going to look really good. To me, and maybe it's just because I went to film school, because when I worked out in Hollywood, every young up and coming filmmaker was like, I just made the most beautiful thing ever. And I'm like, where's the story? There's nothing here for me. And so maybe I'm a little I don't know what the word is, rejective. Maybe I just reject that a little bit more naturally, because nowadays anybody can buy a pretty camera. Anybody can buy a pretty camera. Anybody can do that. And not for nothing, with Columbus, give me a really nice camera. I can make Columbus look really frigging good too. So that's just, I think, where it doesn't do that for me. When I think about movies where you're lost, these slice of life. It's so funny because my friend made fun of me this week because I have Totoro still at number 14 of 15 Ghibli movies. He's like, you just don't like slice of life. I'm like, oh, is Lost in Translation slice of life? He's like, yeah. Everybody wants some slice of life. Yeah. A single man slice of life. Yeah. And then it was like, all right, I just hate Totoro. It stinks. But I love like Lost in Translation. Like I can just connect with Scarlett Johansson in that movie, and I can connect with Bill Murray in that movie. Everybody wants them. I can connect with every single one of those baseball players. A Single Man, I can connect with everything that Colin Firth is going through. In this movie, I could not connect with Haley Lou Richardson at all. And that to me was also saying something, because I also come from like a town where I know a lot of people who I went to high school with who overdosed on heroin and died. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who had drug problems. There's a big drug problem in the county that I grew up in. Like I know so many people like that. And it still did not resonate with me at all. And maybe it was just misplaced expectations. I don't know, but it just did not hit me. And I almost just felt like the entire time, like, why? Like, what is profound about this? Like, I could not figure out what was profound about it. And it's one of those movies. This is going to be a polarizing movie. Like, there's no way it wasn't going to be polarizing.
It is. And, like, that is exactly how I've seen people respond to it. People either love this movie or they just don't care about this movie. You don't have the people who are like, it's a good movie. You have people who sing its praises, or you have people who are like, not my cup of tea. But I get it. And like I said, I think a lot of it plays into like where I am in life right now really helps me connect to Haley Richardson's character in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that's what it all comes down to really with any movie, especially when you're going to get into small movies, when you're going to get into indie movies, when you're going to get into these movies that really are about personal stuff that like you can't explain. Like when I like made my ranking the first time, because like I had a ranking like on IMDb back in like 2010, and I think I had Lost in Translation in my top 10 at that point. And I was 17 years old, whatever the hell I was. And I remember putting that in my ranking at like that point. I remember my dad being like, really? Like, what the hell do you see in this movie? But at the same time, like, it's a love story about just two lost people. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is the movie that you used Columbus to replace Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind for this week. Like, that is a movie that is very much just about two completely lost people. And so when it's a movie about that, like, you're either going to connect with it or you're not. Like I had said to you, like, I tried to get people to watch Adaptation. Adaptation to me is a clever, funny movie that people should find funny. I'm never going to sit down with a group of guys and be like, let's watch Lost in Translation tonight. I have to know you very well, and I have to know your taste very well, because that's not a movie that's for everybody. And like, that's kind of what Columbus is. And I guess Ozu is the same way, because Troy Long just said, John, do you like Ozu? Have you seen Ozu films? Have you watched any Ozu films? No. Either. It's very depressing. The only one I watched, I think, was Yugetsu, and it was okay. I didn't love it. It didn't really do it. I got it, but I didn't like love it. And I have to watch a Tokyo Story. I mean, the fact that I haven't watched Tokyo Story yet is kind of brutal.
I know. It's one of those movies that's sitting on my list waiting for me to get to it. It's just, dedicating 3 hours to it.
Yeah, I know. And it's subtitled. I mean, that's hard. It's hard, but it'll happen. It'll happen before the end of this podcast, I swear. Not this one right now, but before the end of the podcast. Yeah. What else you got there? So like when you're sitting down and you're watching a movie like this and you're just like, okay, like this is a movie that I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch. Yes, it's very much about like the time of your life that you're in, but what is it that sets this one apart from like any of the movies I just named, or like other movies of the genre that do have more story? Because I don't think that there'd be an argument here. There's not much of a story to this movie.
No, not at all. And it's even really hard to figure out which of Haley Richardson's Casey and John Cho's Jin is the main character of this story. And I think it does have to do with the fact, I think the setting's so important in this movie, because it's this place where people flock to for a specific reason. And we have someone who feels stuck there because he's feeling obligated. We have two characters who are stuck there because they feel obligated to their parents. And I think that just adds this other dynamic to it. And the fact that they are so different in age, the characters are about 20-year difference, I would say, at this point. And they're so different in age, but they can still connect over this exact same feeling that they have. This obligation to be there, but this desire not to be there.
Yeah, and I think that's where certain movies can just nail that. Like Lost in Translation is very much this same thing. And I don't want to talk too much about that movie, but it's just the easiest comparison because that movie is the same thing. It's about two people who don't want to be where they are, but they feel obligated to stay where they are. Like they feel, Bill Murray feels like, oh, I got to get my job. And she feels like I got to support my boyfriend / husband. I think it's his husband at the time. I forget. I haven't seen the movie in a while, but either way, they feel like they have to be there. And I totally get that because you can see Haley Richardson. It's the whole Piano Man when everybody's belting it out and the lyrics are, they put bread in my jar and say, man, what are you doing here? Like, yeah, that's a happy song. Can't wait to play that at a wedding. Like you guys don't realize, like, I hope your marriage doesn't turn out the way Piano Man turns out. Cause that's not a good thing. And, you know, I think that this plays on those types of fears and it plays on those types of emotions of what if I don't succeed? What if I don't turn out successful? What if I do kind of turn out, you know, I always think of Take the Long Way Home by Supertramp, the song where it's like, you know, when you look through the years and see what you could have been, what you might have been if you had more time, like you always think about that kind of thing. Like, what if I don't live up to the hype? And you're trying to convince yourself, like, maybe that's okay. Maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it'll be okay. But the people who are artsy, who have that type of mindset, who want to be creators, who want to be in it, you're never going to be satisfied. You're never going to be satisfied until you get there. And then half the time, that's why we see all these depressed people who are artists, because they get there and they're still not satisfied. And I think that's what this movie, it doesn't hit it for me, but I understand at least, like, why, like, this struggle of, like, Haley Lou Richardson wants to be an architect and instead she's going to be a tour guide who does it. It's like the people who want to be filmmakers, but instead they end up being film critics. Like, good for you. You're not a filmmaker. And like, that's kind of what we're doing right now. Like, we're being film critics at the end of the day. But at the same time, like, I hope we're giving a thoughtful, really, like, well-positioned, only talking about movies we like for the most part type take. But you try to get in it any way you can, and you try to get in it within your means or what you think your means are. And for her, it's like, this is the best I'm ever going to get. This is the closest I'm ever going to get to it because I cannot leave my mom here because she's going to die. And at what point do you say to yourself, this isn't my thing anymore? I need to remove myself from this situation and then go on to be like Boogie Nights, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's the big thing, right? Like, Jin feels this obligation to be there for his dying father. But I think one of the most beautiful scenes is the one where he's talking about, Casey asks if he's going to be well enough to fly to Seoul. And Jin's just like, I hope not. Because I don't want that pressure and the obligation to mourn for this man I had no connection with for my entire life. And that's just so profound to me. And it's just playing so much on that cultural aspect of Korean culture and presenting in a way that's so easily understandable for people not a part of that culture.
Yeah, but this, it's so universal because, like, what I always think of with the dying father, the big one for me is always in Magnolia. When Tom Cruise goes to see his father, who was the biggest scumbag of all time while he's on his deathbed, and it's I will not cry for you. I will not cry for you. Like, I will not. Yeah. And he ends up breaking down sobbing because at the end of the day, like, it's the only father you're going to have. It's the only one. So you can be bitter, you can be miserable, you can want to be away from it, you can try to remove yourself from the situation, but at the end of the day, you still feel that obligation because you know it's the only one that's ever going to be there. You're never going to get another shot at this. That's not easy. Like, that's not easy to just walk away from. And then plus, are you going to have that guilt for your entire life? Can you handle that guilt for your entire life? A great movie like this, which is kind of similar to this, but a little bit darker, but I've Loved You So Long. Watch that movie with Kristen Scott Thomas. Brutal, devastating. I think she was nominated for an Oscar for it, but it's very similar where it's like this situation of like her son or something like that. And I don't even want to get into it because I'll spoil it because I only remember certain parts of the movie because I saw it so long ago. But what can you live with and what can you not live with? And can you live with going out to live your dream while your mom becomes a meth addict again? And can you go out and go back to your life while your father's on his deathbed? Is that going to be okay with you? Those are things you don't actually know the answer to until they're over.
Yeah.
And then you have to live with it.
Yeah. And that's what's so nice about where this film ends, where it's them both accepting their lots in life, essentially, where Casey accepts, okay, I do need to go out and do this for me. And I should take my chance and look into this architecture stuff. And Jin has found his own apartment in Columbus to live in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's nice because it doesn't show us that past that point. It doesn't show us what happens to them after their decision, but it shows us them taking that step towards a decision, no matter the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a good, like, my favorite scene of this movie, and one where I was really into, was when Rory Culkin is talking to Haley Lu Richardson about the attention spans.
Yes.
And I love that. I think it's a perfect scene because so what I love so much about that, and it kind of relates to this whole like moving on, going where you need to go, but like it's what you're into. You know, I always hate like when old people, and I will call people old now, and I'm still in my 20s for at least 6 more months, so I'm going to call you old. But like, I hate these old people who are like, your generation doesn't like to work. Your generation doesn't like to do anything. Your generation, oh, they're so lazy, blah, blah. We just don't want to be you. Like, we just don't want to be trapped in a situation that we don't like for 30 years, because I feel like every generation is introspective, don't get me wrong, but I feel like our generation has a lot easier time being introspective because there's so much out there for us to see, and we're able to see successes and failures every friggin' day on every single time we open our phone. It's crazy. And so I think it's a little bit easier to be introspective and to think like, what do I actually want to achieve? And this conversation about attention spans, it relates to everything in the world. It relates to politics. It relates to your favorite sports team. It relates to whatever. You sit down and you watch a Columbus Blue Jackets game, and it's the most important thing in the world to you. I sit down and watch a Columbus Blue Jackets game, and I better bet on it. Otherwise, it means nothing to me. But it's the perspective of that. Yep. And I think, like, ultimately where I hope that Kogonada and other directors who are like this, who do think deeply, even if I don't necessarily appreciate the movie, where I hope that they still continue to have a voice is, these are the types of conversations you need to be having, because when things are so set for in one way for so long that that's the dominant one, it starts to become a fight every time you try to go against that. And why is it a fight every time you try to go against that? Why is one thing considered to be the only way when in reality both ways can work? And I think that just relates to everything, and especially in this movie when it's talking about attention span. Well, when it's books or when it's video games, why are video games? Same thing. Like when I would play video games, my dad would be like, "Oh, you're a child." But then if he would sit down and watch a movie, how is that any different? It's not any different. Yeah. Like, it's no different at all. But one is more socially acceptable as intelligent. Me and my fiance were talking about the other day how Tony Hawk made every single dollar in his life off of being a skateboarder and video games at a time when we were kids and told being a skateboarder and playing video games were bad. And he's one of the most recognizable faces in sports, spanning now 30 something years. Like, it's just so interesting how, like, I think that conversation is good because it is talking about attention span, but at the end of the day, it is developing so much more. And it's talking about like all of these things of like the right thing to do. What's the right thing? The right thing might be to stay with your mother, but we're at a time now where that's not the same anymore. It's not the same thing anymore. And now it's responsibility for yourself and for what you care about. And if you're going to be a drug addict because of the guys, you can't take everybody down with you anymore.
And I mean, that brings us around to like the second like main theme of this movie to me, which is finding your passion. Because I feel like there are a lot of instances where Casey doesn't know what her passion is. We're given massive hints that it's architecture the entire movie. But when Jin asks her, "You want to be an architect?" she says, "I don't think so." And she just doesn't know, despite the fact that she loves the architecture and she has a list of her favorite buildings in town. And she goes around and just like sits there and looks at these buildings and appreciates them and memorizes facts about them. But to me, what I think is building off of that scene with Rory Culkin, where they're talking about attention versus interest, is the scene where they go to the bank. And Jin's like, "What do you like about this building?" And Casey's just talking, it's the first modernist bank, and it's not like a prison essentially, and it's a ground level entry. He's like, no. I don't want the tour guide explanation of why this building is good. How's it move you? And we never hear her answer. And this is what I think is the most beautiful scene in the entire movie. And it's because as she's explaining the facts about this building, it's all her reflection. She's reflected in the glass, and then it flips over, and when she's finally saying why it moves her, and she shows it so well. Haley Lee Richardson's face in this scene is incredible, and we don't hear a single word, but we're just looking straight at her face. But you understand why Jin asked that question, because it's that searching for what actually gives you passion.
Yeah, and like I don't like some of the things that Kogonada does in this movie. Like I personally I'm like, did you not give us her answer because you didn't know how to write her answer and make it powerful? Right. Like, you know, and I felt the same way later on in the movie when she's in the car, get like crying, breaking down. Like I want to be in there with them. Like I want to connect. I want to be in there. The scene where he's shooting it in the mirror and it's John Cho with what's her name, and they're like Parker Posey, I guess, and like they're together. I'm like, okay, cool. Like you can shoot through a mirror and all of that. And like I get there's art to it and all that, but like to me that doesn't connect. But I do agree with you, like the passion thing. Like at the end of the day, like we wouldn't be sitting here doing a podcast that we get barely 100 views on YouTube, and then we actually get pretty good numbers on Audio Boom still. But the point is, like, we wouldn't be doing that if we didn't care. Same reason, like, why did I start this podcast with Will way back when we started it, talking about Survivor? Because it's kind of that same, it's like the tour guide thing. It's like, well, we wanted to talk about Survivor. We wanted to be on Survivor, and we couldn't get on Survivor. So then we started talking about it, and like, you become passionate about it. This has been going on for almost 6 full years now, and we've never gotten bought out by anybody. We don't have any major sponsors. We don't have any of that, but we just love doing it. It's a hobby. We make some money off of it, but it's just enjoyable. And it's something that kind of keeps you grounded. At the end of the day, would I love to be Ben Mankiewicz? Absolutely. The guy who does the Turner Classic Movies intros, and he just sits there and watches really good movies and talks about them. I would love to do that. Unfortunately, my great-grandfather or grandfather, whatever the hell it is, isn't Herman L. Mankiewicz. So like, that's never going to happen. But at the end of the day, that's what you're hoping. You're hoping that you get that Ebert and Roper type, or I guess Ebert and Roper type thing, where it's like, oh, like now everybody's going to like listen to us and like all that. At the end of the day, I don't care if you listen to me. I don't care if you love Columbus. I don't care if you hate Columbus. I just like that we can sit down and talk about this for an hour. And it's something that we look forward to. Like I look forward to this podcast every time. I look forward to the normal Survivor podcast Alexa and I do every time. Not so much the ones that we've been doing lately because they're annoying. But when the show's on and you can passionately talk about it, like that is so much fun. And it's about trying to make that shine through. It's about trying to make sure that's a part of your life, because for so many generations, and that's the one thing I will say, and obviously you have to think a little bit too much, in my opinion, for this movie. It doesn't give me enough, but this movie does show that like the older generations have such a harder time accepting it than the younger generations. The younger generations are always thinking about it, even if they're going to be a tour guide. But I'm not giving you tour guide answers to how I feel about Columbus. Neither is John. When I talk about Everybody Wants Them, I can't tell you why that's a great movie. I can't, because it's not a great movie, but it is to me. I can't tell you that though. And so it's finding a way to make the passion something, even if I'm not going to be friggin', Charlie Kaufman, that's fine. But how can I make sure that I'm still as involved in what I've always wanted to be doing? How do you make that happen? And I think that's what the message of Columbus is. I wish he would have told me that instead of being pretentious. I literally could read the definition of pretentious. Columbus's picture is next to it. But I do get that, like, that is where it is. And if this is the type of movie that is about that hits you, it's just a different type of movie than the movie that hits me about this same exact thing. It's a different style. That's all it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just what it comes down to. And I mean, reeling back on your point about the whole older generation not understanding, like, the younger generation's lack of desire to be stuck in a job for 40 years that they are just doing to pay the bills. That's what this movie's about. And I think it just captures that spirit of finding a passion and just doing it. No matter the consequences, no matter what might happen, go out and do it. Because even if you fall flat in your face, at least you've done it.
Exactly. And if you fall flat on your face, then so what? You know what I mean? Then so what? Like, it's just like, and I think that's the thing. I think this movie is ultimately about the fear of failure too, of like, if I go out and I fail and my mom dies, or if I go home and if I fail as a son, like there's so many layers of that. And that fear of failure is what keeps people held back. Everybody goes to the Steve Jobs thing of like, oh, well, we only get one life and that's the best thing we could do because then it makes you push and do all that. Unfortunately, that's not how a lot of people look at it. It doesn't push people to that. And like every career decision I've made could be the wrong career decision I've made. But at the end of the day, if you're happy with what you're doing, then who cares if it's the right career decision. Like you might not make as much money and there might be another path right now where I'm a millionaire on a yacht, but that's not the path I chose, but at least I'm doing stuff that I'm kind of happy with. Is that okay? I don't know. To me, it is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just what it comes down to. And it's funny because it's just what we're pursuing right now with this podcast, like you said, right? We're not here discussing the exact technical reasons. Yes, we'll get into that, but we're here to show and have the listeners realize why these films move us and why they're in our top 100.
Yeah, and it's a reason why like a movie like Citizen Kane isn't. Because even though Citizen Kane is perfectly made, I connect with that movie on 0 levels. And that's why a movie like Shakespeare in Love is. And maybe Shakespeare in Love will be a movie that I drop down on my list now that I'm older and I'm watching it with a different eye, like with a different lens. But so many people hate that movie just because, but like that doesn't mean that I have to hate it. Like I can connect with that and I can be a part of that. And like that connects with me on a way that like maybe you'll never understand it, but I don't need you to ever understand it because it just connects with me. And the same thing with these buildings. I could give a shit about architecture. I don't care. I don't think I've ever looked at a building in my life and been like, wow, that's pretty. I don't care. That's not for me. But at the same time, I sit here and I watch a foreign movie that is in black and white from the 50s and people are running around saying things that people nowadays would never say. Most people would watch that and not understand it. That's fine. That's just what it is. It is what it is. And that's, you just have to be okay with like who you are and what you're into. And that's, Columbus is saying that. It's just saying it in very few words.
Maybe we just found the actual reason why this movie speaks to me more. I love architecture.
That probably helps.
It does. It definitely does.
Yeah, because I don't. And it doesn't hit me. It doesn't hit me. And it's, what though? It's the same thing. Like, you'll talk to people who like, they love politics. They love sports. They love comic books. They love like whatever. And half those things to you might be like, oh my God, how do you like any of that? Yeah. Some people just do. Like some people just find it fascinating to watch stuff play out in certain ways. And like, to me, like a building's a building. Like, yeah, do I like the architecture in Miami better than the architecture in like the Northeast? For the most part, yeah. But like, I've never been like, oh my God, I just need to like look at that building. No, put me next to a body of water and that's what's going to make me happy. That's what's going to get me going. So I don't know. I mean, it's just totally on preference, but I guess John likes buildings. So John likes it.
I'm the guy who stops on the street to look at a building if I find it fascinating.
I don't like anything that's taller than me. So
I used to go around and just look at houses and appreciate the design of houses. So yeah, architecture is something that I do enjoy and I do appreciate. So yeah, that's probably why Columbus speaks to me more as this lost person genre of film than some of the others out there. Yeah,
I mean, that's totally fair. Doesn't speak to me at all. Nothing. No. John, fine. You didn't convince me. Fine. You didn't convince me.
That's fine.
No convincing. And it's funny because like I think this is the lowest rating you've given any of my movies. It's the lowest rating I've given yours. I think you had Who Framed Roger Rabbit at 2.5 too, but that was just a mistake on your part. But I think it's like funny that like we're doing that in the same week, and like District 9, I don't connect with the way you connect with Columbus, so it is what it is. Yeah. But like, I'm curious. Like I just said before, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Was the best movie I watched this week. Would anybody else agree with that if they watched that movie this week? I don't know. Some Smiles of a Summer Night. I don't know. But like those are the movies that connect with me that don't connect with other people. That's fine. That's fine. And yeah, Columbus, I mean, I don't know. I was just like, oh, it's over now. But then again, there's going to be movies in here. Like you might watch A Single Man and be like, dude, that was pretentious garbage. But it hit me right in the heart muscle.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's the beauty of film.
Yeah. All right, John, you have anything else you want to say about Columbus, or can I forget this movie exists now?
No, you can forget it exists. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. I know everybody else is going to watch this now. All of our listeners, Jordan Alford's going to watch this because I know he's not in here now. Jordan Alford, Troy Long, everybody's going to sit down there and watch this and be like, dude, that was the best movie ever. Phil, you're an idiot. And like, maybe I am. But, sometimes it hits you. Sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. Sometimes Paddington is just a better movie. I mean, that's just what it is, Paddington's like a masterpiece among masterpieces. So,
yeah, exactly.
But anyway, okay, so next week we are talking about my number 75, which is Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and we are talking about John's number 75, which was also on my list at number blank. It was on my list at number, I got to remember the math, I think 79 or 77, 79, something like that. This is 76, right? So 77, 78. Yeah, 79. Yep. Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. So it's the first time that we're actually talking about one of these movies that we've had to skip over because it was higher on somebody else's list. It was only 3 spots higher, or 4 spots higher, whatever it is. So not that much higher, but we're going to be watching The Lord of the Rings in reverse order. We figure that if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you've probably seen them so many times anyway that does it really matter where you pick up. I could probably watch this movie in reverse order and still get the same feeling from it because I've seen all of the Lord of the Rings trilogy probably about 50 times, which is really pathetic to admit. But we are watching the third Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. That'll be the one we watch next week. I am not watching the extended edition, John, so do not even try to talk me into it.
I'm not either. Don't worry.
3 hours and 20 minutes is plenty.
It's plenty.
Yeah, it's plenty.
It's plenty. But I'm really interested to talk about this movie next week because generally I don't tend to go to the end of a trilogy first. I'm really looking forward to watching this movie by itself and looking at it just as a film rather than as the conclusion of a trilogy.
Well, and I think it might be beneficial sometimes too, because a lot of times with the Lord of the Rings, if you sit down, you will try to watch the Fellowship first, then you end up watching all 3 and you go through the whole journey. What will it be like to really just be able to watch this movie as a one-off and just say to yourself, okay, now I don't have the first 2 movies right before it. How does this one hold up? I think it's a great movie. I think it gets a little too many knocks against it for being long and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't bother me. So I'm excited to talk about this one. And Diving Bell and the Butterfly, the Julian Schnabel movie from 2007. So we're in the 2000s next week, entirely in the 2000s. And it'll be interesting to talk about a movie that we both have on our list. It's the first movie we're talking about that we both have on our list, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. So that's next week. It'll be next Monday, time TBD. And hope you're enjoying this. Pwood43, J Millsip. I know we get no new followers ever, but that's fine.
I got like 3 this week. I don't know what you're talking about, Phil.
Did you actually? It's because you like Columbus. I did not, so it doesn't help me. But maybe it's because I watched too many movies and people are just like, all right, now you're just blowing up my feed to be annoying because I watched a ridiculous amount of movies this week. But today is the 200th day of the year, and I have to say I watched 200 movies this year, John. I've watched 200 movies in 200 days. I know.
I'm about 40 movies behind right now, so I got some work to do.
You got some work to do, I know. And I was able to catch up this whole past weekend because my fiance was out of town, and I just sat down and I watched 8 movies this weekend. So from Friday through Sunday. So yeah, it was a little absurd, but that will not be keeping up. And I just wanted to kind of get ahead, and that's all. So Diving Bell and the Butterfly, Return of the King next week. Hope you enjoyed listening to us talk about District 9, which we both found more disappointing than we were younger, and Columbus, which John loves and I don't get. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll be talking about Children of Men and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind much, much later for both of us. So look forward to that. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.